Okay, hi, hello everybody. We are going to get things kicked off and get to this very exciting portion of today's first day of the conference. So, hi, hello, and welcome to the 2025 AIA Design Excellence Conference. I'm Nkiru Gellis. I'm an architect with Low Design Office, and I'm also your AIA President-elect. To be president next year, and as a thank you. I do want to say, as a volunteer, I think it's important to mention my wonderful practice, Low Design Office, who are very generous in allowing me to be here today while they're toiling away back at the office. So thank you, Low Design Office. And it's truly an honor to kick off the first day here at the stunning Central Library designed by Lake Flato, a very inspiring space that symbolizes Austin's commitment to innovation, community, and sustainability. And before we get into the meat of today, I do want to extend my deepest thanks to our exhibitors around our expo. Thank you, and the sponsors. And without our sponsors, the event just would not be possible. So please make sure to take time, and we have a bingo card of sponsor names that you can check off. And is there a prize? I hope there is a prize. Okay, good. So visit all our lovely sponsors, but also a very special shout out to our keynote sponsor, GPRS Existing Conditions. They are the ones who are making this session possible today, and their table is in the exhibit hall, so please stop by and say thank you. Also, don't miss our JEDI committee table and our Women in Architecture table as well. They're both here to learn more about the initiatives and see how you all can also get involved with what they're doing. So I want to kick things off by bringing up the chairs of our fellowship committee, Lori Limbacher and Luis Haudiger, two of our members who were elevated to AIA Fellowship this year. And Lori and Luis are going to give out their fellowship pins to them. And I was lucky enough to be at that fellowship investiture earlier in Chicago, and it was an incredible experience. The room of new fellows and just the caliber of folks that they are joining is absolutely amazingly incredible. So I'll welcome up to the stage Lori and Luis to award our new fellows.
Well, Ingrid tricked me. She said, all you have to do is put the pin on. I didn't know I had to actually say anything. So this is not my natural habitat, but I'll try. Thank you so much, Nkiru. The AIA Fellowship Program was developed to elevate those architects who've made a significant contribution to architecture and society and who have achieved a standard of excellence in the profession. Election to fellowship not only recognizes the achievements of architects as individuals, but also their significant contribution to architecture and society on a national level.
Hello, Luis Haudiger here. And I just wanted to share with you that only 83 architects are elevated to be a fellow this year. And this is out of 95,000 members. So it's a very high distinction, and we're very honored to be here celebrating this great event.
Thank you. So today we'd like to recognize our two Austin new fellows, beginning with our 2022 AIA Austin president, Camille Job. In case you don't remember, I always cry, so I'm already overcome. For over 3 decades, Camille Job has advanced architecture in Texas through design excellence, community leadership, and service to the profession. As co-founder of Job Corral Architects, she's celebrated for projects that combine beauty, sustainability, and a deep respect for place. Her work, ranging from adaptive reuse to contemporary ranch houses, has earned numerous AIA awards and national recognition. A dedicated mentor and past AIA Austin president, Camille's career reflects her unwavering belief that architecture can elevate both lives and landscapes. Pretty good. Anyway, Camille, please come up and get your FAIA pin. We prearranged where we were going to put this, so we didn't have to mess up her beautiful blouse.
Thank you, Lori. Lori and I go back a long time. We were both fellow Aggies, and we went to school at the same time.
We went to school together.
Yes. So next, I'd like to introduce our next recipient, which is Burton Baldridge, fellow AIA. Burton is a native Texan, former attorney, but he gave up the courtroom for the drafting table, and back in 2005, he founded his firm, Baldridge Architects. His company and his work is known for uncompromising clarity, seamless detail, inspired pragmatism. His projects range from intimate residences to award-winning hotels, education spaces, and public installations across the country. With more than 24 AIA awards, that's a lot, national publications, and deep commitment to mentoring, service, and community engagement. Absolutely, a lot of commitment as past president, or current president, excuse me, of our chapter. Burton's career exemplifies the highest ideals of the profession, and now those of the fellows. Burton.
So, congratulations to our newest fellows.
Congratulations, Camille and Burton. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Boone Bowling from GPRS Existing Conditions, our keynote event sponsor.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share with you now and just a little bit later on in the day. I am with GPRS and Existing Conditions. I serve as the market segment leader for reality capture for the Texas market. And reality capture, to put a definition on it, is any type of documentation that represents the real world environment. So that concept is not new. We've been doing it for ages, but the technology we have now that allows us to do it better, more efficiently, and more quickly has changed a lot in recent decades. And I will be able to share a little bit more on that. A recent example here in town is the Santa Rita Courts project. We had the privilege of partnering with Urban Foundry to document 6 of these structures. Most of the units were still occupied, so we were able to use LiDAR to go in and tastefully and respectfully scan these spaces and then document and build a BIM model that their team could use to do their design and rehab work. At 12:30 today, I'll share a different case study for a large building in Boston, Massachusetts we worked on. Very involved, very complicated, but technology allowed us to meet the needs of the designers, and I look forward to seeing y'all at 12:30 to learn more about it.
Thank you, Boone, and thank you, GPRS Existing Conditions again. We are definitely excited to learn more about the offerings later on in the exhibit hall. So on to our keynote speaker. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome to the conference Cherie Dobbin, cultural architect and CEO of SRD Culture. Coming from a background of performance and theater, Cherie is a truly remarkable individual. A cultural and placemaking advisor, she is one of the world's leading voices in embedding art and energy back into the life of a city. Over her 35-year career, Cherie has partnered with a broad network of developers, architects, landscape architects, artists, and a plethora of research disciplines across US, UK, and the world to curate cultural frameworks that transform the public realm into engines of community, creativity, and connection. While creative director of the Times Square Alliance and founding director of Times Square Arts, Cherie created the world's largest and longest-running digital art exhibition, Midnight Moment, synchronizing artist videos across 7 blocks of billboards every night. Just a part of one of the most successful business improvement districts in the world. As managing partner and creative director for Future City, the world's leading cultural placemaking agency, Cherie works to shape districts of entire cities and world-class institutions such as Pompidou Center, Museum of London, developing guiding frameworks for engaging communities with culture, building identity, and elevating the value and significance of place. Her work has shaped ambitious cultural sustainability strategies for new living in the city of Melbourne, leading cultural placemaking strategies with London Bridge, Wembley Park, and Exhibition Road, as well as innovative programs at the Watermill Center and with art institutions from the Boston Ballet to the Los Angeles Opera. Recently London-based, American-born, Times Square-tested, and internationally recognized, Cherie brings all these expertise with her today to the DEC, showing us how pairing creative minds with urban challenges can reshape public space, shift perspectives, and build cities where culture can truly thrive. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, so please join me in welcoming Cherie Dobbin to the stage.
Yeah, no pressure there. Okay. Good morning. I first want to begin by giving a tribute to 2 Texans who have recently passed away. Robert Wilson, who was born in Waco, Texas in 1941 and passed away on the 31st of this month. Please go to Instagram and read Tom Waite's epitaph. I don't think there's ever been a better one. I was actually with Bob at the center when he passed away working on the legacy plans. He's an icon of alternative narrative, durational theater, and a groundbreaker of immersive exhibition. He trained as an architect. He was a failed architect. In addition to all of his works, inclusive of public art, he was a master of what he called megastructures. And it was from Bob that I really learned how to structure artworks, make opportunities, excite creatives, and really push them. And while running his center, I was fortunate to be respected and cherished by the extraordinary Christophe de Menil of the Houston Philanthropy family. And she shared this incredible balance of outrageousness, elegance, and depth. And they've really helped me to shape the approach that I take. So a city contains more than any inhabitant can know. And a great city always makes the unknown and the possible spurs to the imagination. So how does culture do this tangibly? I set a definition for creative placemaking, as there are many of them out there. And I put it forward as this. It intentionally leverages the power of arts, culture, and creativity to serve a community's interest while driving a broader agenda for change, growth, and transformation in a way that builds character and establishes a quality of place. This was a phrase that was used by a professor at the Boston University School for the Arts when I was there. We'd be wandering around in an acting class, and all of a sudden he'd shout out, "Surprise yourself." And I used to think this was insane. Like, how do you actually surprise yourself when you're the actual author? And I really wondered, how is it that we could do this? But then I was working in Stevenage in the UK. This is one of the first post-war new towns that was built. And the scheme was to revive the town center gardens. So for 50 years, there was this park, and it had these 3 what we call tower blocks, which is subsidized housing, that were around the park. And the job was hired by the local council to bring our firm in and do creative consultation and really get at the heart of what people thought was the identity of place. And so the work that we would do would feed into the landscape architect's brief. So we hired 2 artists named Patricia McKinnon Day and Beverly Carpenter. And they found it really difficult to engage with residents about a park. The scale was really vast. People didn't quite know how to break it down or how to talk about it or how to figure out what would be important. And the 2 artists came up with this proposal, which sounded really simple and actually not that interesting, to be quite honest, which was to create a 1-by-1 scale of one of the flats and just lay it down as cheaply as possible, basically like masonite and plywood, and then invite residents to come into the flat. Their premise was that this scale was far more appropriate, this domestic scale. And it was extraordinary because all they did was set up this basic structure. And then the individuals from the flats started to bring items from their homes to decorate it. And the next thing you know, the entire thing was created from the residents. And then they set up what they wanted to do. So there were bingo nights, there was like the senior citizens mixer, there was, a music event. My favorite thing was that the teenagers would actually step outside the door to smoke because they weren't supposed to smoke inside the flat. But the thing that was so extraordinary to me is I was having a conversation with an older gentleman who had been living there for 25 years. And he came up to me and he said, "Isn't art amazing? I walk through this park every day for 25 years, but today I was surprised." So this word, surprise, and the notion of it has always stuck with me. This is how, in a sense, we surprise ourselves in places that we know really well. The ideas that came together and formed HTA Architects, it actually then won $2.1 million in National Lottery Heritage funding, and it was the first new town that ever won heritage funding, which in the UK is a big deal. So the idea of how you can get people involved very often can be spurred by this surprise. This is an image of Josephine Meck-Sieper's The Manhattan Project. This was a public art piece that was put up in a parking lot. And it was a comment, really, about the capitalization that was going on in the area of Times Square where NASDAQ is. But people looking at this and seeing this in a very, very dense urban place made them start to wonder, what is this doing here? Why is this? I had some people who phoned me up and asked me, how is it we could possibly allow drilling in this area? But it sparked all of this debate. And it was that juxtaposition that helped it. Anish Kapoor's Cloudgate, he says, the idea here was to make a work that was drawing in the sky, the skyline and all of that, and at the same time allowing you to enter it like a piece of architecture that was pulling your own reflection into the fulcrum, making a kind of participatory experience. The bean was named by the public in jest, but now we can see that that simplicity of concept has helped it to last and to morph, and it's constantly reflecting the city in its contemporary and dynamic form. Anthony Gormley's Angel of the North was a piece that now we've all come to recognize as being an icon, welcoming you into the north of England. But at the time, it was absolutely hated. Anthony Gormley was actually accused of putting up a Nazi structure, of being able to distract, or it was going to somehow interfere with people's phone and television reception. But you can see from this photo that I took a couple of years ago that people have come to really embrace it and to love it, and it's that simplicity of having a form that welcomes you. Chris Burden's project Urban Light sits outside of the Los Angeles Contemporary Museum of Art. It's become an emblem of LA. And at first you think that it's just a series of lampposts and a grid, but actually it's 202 vintage street lamps of 17 different designs from various cities in and around the LA area. What it can do, the simplicity of concept of taking one thing but showing the detail of it, makes us go back into our city and reinvestigate it in a new way. Simone Lee's brick house on the High Line, Simple proposal. She says, it would be a great opportunity to have something about Black beauty right in the middle of that environment. So this offers us many interpretations of how we see beauty, how we see Blackness, how we see female power in the presence of a city that's very often associated with this Wolf of Wall Street type of energy. Architect Jürgen Meyer's Metropole Parasol, which is also known as the Mushrooms of Seville, was opened in 2011. He won it in an open competition, and part of it, this largest wooden construction in the world, he integrated the aspects of a Roman colony and generated this icon for the city. Yayoi Kusama's iconic pumpkin sculpture that's at the Noshima Island, which is now known as the Art Island, this has become an international destination. This juxtaposition of a decorated pumpkin that goes beyond human scale against the expansive, natural landscape really helps us to see both of these items in more detail. So one thing that Robert Wilson would always say when we would start to design something and feel that we could get to the answer really quickly was, if you know what to do, do the opposite. This again is talking about how do we take ourselves and push beyond what seems necessarily logical or rational. Michael Heisner's levitated mass is also outside of LACMA, right near the La Brea tar pits. And this idea of an artificial experience of walking underneath what feels like it should be on the ground puts us into an experience which makes us feel slightly tense in wondering whether this rock is really going to fall on us or if it's not. And it's that tension that holds us. Mike Kelly took a one-to-one model of his home that he grew up in, and he called this mobile homestead. But at first, this piece of his Michigan home, he did with 2 layers. The actual home itself, he opened up to be different rooms and allowed the community to curate the different experiences. But in its first sighting, he had an underground mirror of it, in which the Underground Art Society could actually just create their own events and not worry about how it related to what was up above. And he could hold that tension between what is inside, what is public, and what is private. Doug Aitken's Mirage series, this one is from Desert X in 2017. And this place is a house that's fully reflective. Again, it's another example of taking something of domestic scale and something that's so vast. It allows a portal where you are able to sort of concentrate, feel like you can take in everything that's around you. And when I was in Times Square, perhaps the most extreme example of you can do anything if you do the right thing and you do it well was this piece. A South African performance artist named Robin Rode decided that he wanted to do a staging of Schoenberg's Erwartung. Now, German expressionistic opera isn't even really loved by the opera community. So the idea of putting it in the most populous place on earth in Times Square seemed odd to some. But what he knew is he translated this idea of being lost in a forest by moonlight, and he thought about the illumination from the screens being that. And in it, the sort of chorus that's deafening to this character is all the cacophony of noise that's in Times Square. What happened is it cleared the entire area of any of the costume characters who were trying to take people's money for photos. And we had people fascinated by watching the live creation and what a human voice could actually do. Doho Su's Bridging House in London. This is, again, a childhood home that all of a sudden felt like it was being dropped from the sky, and it landed on this pedestrian walkway in the city of London. By growing this bamboo forest and this impossible position of what is a rural home, the work sparked so much curiosity by people saying, what is this? Why is this here? What is this about? What is it commenting on? And it opened up an entire discussion about the multicultural heritages of the city. So the same architect for Seville came to me and said, I'd love to do a project in Times Square. And we had this like long winding conversation. I was telling him about the challenges of public space. I was talking about the lack of interesting street furniture. We were talking about how do you get people to slow down? What is it you can do? I didn't give him a specific brief. I just gave him a lot of context. And he came back 10 days later with this proposal, and it's called XXX, From Times Square with Love. Now, if you're old enough like me, you know that XXX was a porn theater, so it's a reference to Times Square's past. But the Gen Z and the millennials just know it as XXX, what you sign off on like a text or a love letter. And this wonderful dichotomy of meaning really, really summed up Times Square. And what this did is that when you started to Google Times Square and the plazas, this is the series of images that comes up. So by making something that is completely appropriate to place, the public will take ownership of that. They'll label it and they'll put it back out there. But it is the authenticity which seems to resonate and to get things photographed continuously. So if you've been to London, you'll know about my next example of King's Cross. But this notion, this new mantra that I've come up with now in the consultancy role that I do, is shared perception is your reality. And this has come up in a project that I'm working on right now with the City of Boston and the Center, Boston Center for the Arts. And it's in a position in where it's receiving a lot of expectations and criticism, either of what it's doing effectively, how it's managing a series of spaces and partners. And there's the reality that if there are enough people who share a perception, it doesn't matter whether they're right or not. You have to deal with their perception as a fact that you have to battle. So King's Cross, again, if you're in my age group, you would have known as a horrible place to actually walk through or arrive into. It had a lot of empty buildings around it. What is now the Great St. Pancras Hotel was derelict, and it kind of looked like this. There was a lot of prostitution, there were a lot of drug dealers. There was no place to sit when you were inside the station. The only place where you could get food if you missed your train was a McDonald's, which was also being shared with all the prostitutes and drug dealers. And when it was announced that it was going to be redeveloped and turn into one of the destinations in the world, and have high-end housing, everyone thought this was ridiculous. So they hired an artist, an environmental artist named Michael Pinsky, to actually come in and curate a series of programs. And what he did was concentrate on temporary installations and things that would really challenge what you thought could happen in this place. So he invited proposals for radical rethinking. This particular one is Marjetica Porch, and worked with the architectural duo Ooze to create this piece, Soil and Water. And basically what they did is they created a mound and a basin to allow wild swimming. The contrast of an area that was so dirty that you couldn't sit in to a place where you could actually bathe in really started to open up people's minds as to what could happen there. So that's how it's helped it to become in its current state now, which is interesting because the Gen Zers say to me that they think it's an example of something that is so posh now. They'd have no recollection of the previous King's Cross and what that was. So, own your own low benchmark. Often people want to skirt over this. Own it. Publicize it. Get people to know how bad it is in its current state, because every little bit of improvement that you make from there will be success. So Times Square, you know, the epitome of crime in the 70s and the 80s, had a really low benchmark. No one wanted to go there. No one felt safe. One of the first things that happened actually was the artist Jane Dixon created the first art displays on One Times Square. This was actually birthed not as a great regeneration project. This is a person who was hired to basically populate the screen with advertisements. And she said, you know what, we have all these gaps in the advertising time, and I have all these artists. What if I just get my friends to actually create some artwork and we could put it up there? And the owner was like, great, it's better than having a blank screen. And so this is what grew into the piece Messages to the Public that was curated by Public Art Fund. It's what spurred Creative Time to do more, and then it is what birthed, in essence, the Midnight Moment. Many of you will know that Times Square had offered an open competition, and it was basically the remit was just to redo what was the TKTS ticket booth that was there. And it was the Red Steps proposal that really transformed the area. And the basic, again, the simple premise was, this is a theater district, but the greatest piece of theater is what's happening in front of you by everyday people all the time. And all we need is to position seating that frames what is the stage. And everybody else is the stage. And so this idea of creating the amphitheater, of course, now has turned into a slight epidemic of amphitheaters that seem to go into every design. But if you think about that and what the past was, and to understand that now this is the site where people come together on the summer solstice, again, to do yoga, to actually be on the ground, to be centered in themselves and think of it as a place of wellness. This is an extraordinary transformation, but it wouldn't be so extraordinary if we hadn't really owned the problems of what Times Square were in the beginning. This is an intersection in London at Tottenham Court Road and Charing Cross. This is an image of the Astoria Theatre, and there were several other venues that were really falling into a state of disrepair. Charing Cross Road was a famous street known for some of the most incredible bookshops, and they were closing down due to people reading things on their Kindle and such. There were low rents that were at the center of London, and so when the need for a larger regeneration happened, one of the elements and one of the Section 106 and planning obligations was to consider how to bring back the life of theater, entertainment, and display. So one of the responses was to create this that is now known as Outernet. And it's a combination of a venue, an advertising space, a music venue, offices. And what they did in this design was to ensure that there was a part of it that actually opens to the public, so that that is available. That, of course, helps to display the ingenuity of what the signs are doing, but it also invites people into the building when they can't afford to pay anything. But what really is making headlines for Outernet is actually their public art program. It's the work of the artists that are using this particular space and really expanding people's mind. It's actually gone up as one of the leading destinations in London now, and really this is just what was a sort of unused corner of a ground floor space. This is a pretty uninspiring postmodern design that were offices, and the developer Dominus Group wanted to actually flip the usage of this from office space into student housing, and they wanted to understand what they could do to make this more interesting. And what we did was work on this concept of turning it into a museum, but it had to be a museum that related to a part of the city. And one part of this section of the City of London is that it had an incredible intangible heritage. This was just outside of the old traditional gates. This is where people of many cultures were actually restricted from entering into London. And so when we knew that the Migration Museum in the UK was looking for its first permanent home, we thought this would be an ideal location. One of the founding investors of Dominus Group also was a migrant himself and had a relationship with the museum, and it has transformed it and become a centerpiece now of the future vision of the City of London. I'm currently working on a project called 99 Bishopsgate in the City of London. You can see this exceptionally uninspiring low-story building right here. So as far as owning your low benchmark, I guess design-wise, it's not that hard to sort of go beyond it. But one thing that the architects thought about was, in going for the taller office space, let's keep a separate standalone building. And what is it that we could do? So what we did is a cultural audit of the entire area and looked at what was missing and what needed to be provided, what we found is that there wasn't enough for underrepresented voices, which was a priority in the City of London, to actually have a place to create and present their work. And so we're in the process of discussing with a theater company called Intermission Youth that works with young people who are in what they call the postcode wars, a place to actually be trained in the language of Shakespeare, providing them with opportunity to transform their lives. Right next door is something called 75 London Wall, which was known as Winchester House. This is a retrofit building. And this is the sort of uninspiring back entrance to what was a Deutsche Bank. And one of the things we looked at is this is not a great use of the public realm around it. And so working with the landscape architects, Andy Sturgeon, landscape architects, and also Orms, we looked at how to actually turn the entire space into an outdoor stage. And so the performance can actually happen in the road when it's closed off, or it can happen on the elevated position, and those can swap. And when it's not being used as a stage, then it becomes a very enjoyable environment in which to relax. So we were thinking about how you take an unused space and turn it into something that has relevance any day of the week and at any time of the day or night. So what I want to impart to you is now just to talk a little bit about the fact that for artists, it's the challenge that's really the opportunity. What you need to put out as soon as possible is the actual challenge, the context of the challenge that you face. When I ran Watermill Center, which I often referred to as a lab for the future of the avant-garde, which means I worked with people who were in the process of developing work at a very early stage, a multitude of disciplines, very hard to categorize. But what I learned about was the process and the way in which artists work. And very often, the artists all talk about wanting the problem, the eyesore, the mess. I learned that visual artists really work from a place of authorship and autonomy. In other words, for them, it's really important that they own the idea, they develop the idea, and it's theirs. And that's a different way of collaboration. You need to do things through a series of questions versus statements for them to realize. But for the performing artists, it's all about creating through collaboration. So the concept is the king. They're very open to other creatives being part of the problem solving, and they're very conscious of architecture and also action. So Stephen Lambert did a piece called Capitalism Works for Me, True or False. We did this when there was the government shutdown in 2013. When people were criticizing Times Square for not being authentic anymore, we worked with Grotesque and Juxtapose magazine to create the TKS ticket booth, in which we reenacted a newsstand, but it was made out of artists' objects, and we had artists who came and ran the newsstand every single day and tweeted out who they were. Or you might look at the Powerhouse in Brooklyn, and this was an old industrial building in the Gowanus Canal that was just covered in artist graffiti. Whoops. And part of the idea was, how do you take this artistic effort and actually retain it? And so this sits at the heart of the design for the Powerhouse, where the concept design was developed by Herzog and DeMuren, who you'll hear from tomorrow. Carriage Works in Sydney is another large industrial transport hub that turned into an art gallery, where they focused on the idea of large scale. This Caterina Grossa is a wonderful example about how you can fill it with fine art painting, much like the graffiti artist, but in a different way. But the other thing that Carriage Works does is open up its outdoor space as a farmer's market. And so it really thinks about how to embrace the scale and the problem. So I will admit, it's not all straightforward. This is an example of one of my favorite artist proposals. This is from Nam June Paik in 1975. And I say this because very often we write very, 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 very extensive artist briefs and want them to give very, very, very long proposals. But I find this to be very effective. To Avant-Garde Festival, I will do the firecracker at the art at the airport. I will use very colorful firecracker at night sky. The rhythm of firecracker will be the Morse code signifying video art. What I love about this is it's a very simple concept, but you can visualize the spectacle, and it's delivering an underlying message. So I was once invited to actually be on a residency, as opposed to run one, at a place called Insel Hombruck. And this was a disused airfield in Germany outside of Dusseldorf. And I didn't know what to do in a residency, considering I wasn't the artist. And it took me a while to figure it out. But then I thought, you know, what I haven't really done is found a way to articulate what my process actually is. And how can I turn this into a methodology? So I started to do what everybody does, which is use Post-its. Worked on a large table, but started to break down different steps and organize them in such a way. One of the things that would always frustrate me in meetings was everybody wanted to talk about the project management first. How are we going to do this? And I would always say, like, well, don't we have to know what we're doing first? Don't we need to know what we're doing? And that just seemed like I was being provocative. But I thought, no, actually, what happens and what is this methodology where we put project management at the proper place? So what I did was to really look at, you can't memorize all this, I'm not going to read all this, don't worry. But at the top is the placemaking, it's the research. Then it's the development. Then you define it, you find the connections, and you synthesize it to what you're trying to do. Then you structure it. Then you project manage it. And this process, what I did is I basically have what it's like if you're thinking about it from a development point of view, and then what you're thinking about or how you excite artists. So it's the same thing, it's just sometimes everybody says we use a slightly different vocabulary. But it's finding a parallel, and I do spend a lot of my time basically translating that. Another really frustrating thing that I heard all the time was, but how will we measure it? This comes from everyone. And I would think, how do we measure what? We don't even know what the what is. But then I thought, well, I really like actually going with some existing structures. And if this is the question that always comes up, this is the question that always comes up. So how do we think about finding that sweet spot, that intersectionality of culture, the commercial imperative, and the civic use of it? And a lot of this comes down to starting from a place of understanding. And how do we think of the groups of stakeholders? And there are those who make the actual development. There are the civic institutions that are running parallel or have an impact on it. And then there's also the group who makes it come alive. But I want to lean into this idea of measurement, you know, of the unknown question. And how do we think about this strategically? So if we're going to think about measurements, I translated it this way. Begin with the end in mind. Understand and articulate what those stakeholder benefits are, and how do you identify the critical skills that you're going to need to deliver on these project goals. And so in doing this, when I was working as part of the Urban Art Forum for the Urban Land Institute in the UK, we thought, maybe rather than having a toolkit, what we need is a methodology. So what we developed is a guide which is called Including Culture in Development. If you're a ULI member, it's available on the Knowledge Finder, and you can download it for free. And what we did is we thought about a methodology that works for all scales. You can have 20,000 in your budget, you can have 20 million, you're going to use the same process. So step one is how to understand your stakeholders' priorities for the impacts and the characteristics of the development to create this clear vision of success. i.e., just be upfront and tell us what it is that your investors need. How do you consider then the people that are going to be involved in developing that narrative throughout the whole time? So it is bringing in the people who are thinking about the marketing as well as it is the designers. Then to just set up your benchmarks and your measurements. So build this business case for the cultural investment. You've got to understand what it is you say you want to do, where do you want to move it from and to, and then how are you going to meet those policy requirements to really optimize the developer's impact. Mark these down. Step 3 is how do you identify the type and the duration of this engagement experience that you want? How do you find that that is going to meet the measurements of success, whether it's meanwhile, pop-up, or permanent? And so it's quite simple, but I think it's really important. There is no one public art that solves your problem. And this, you have to think about the typology based on what it is you want to do. So if you really want to make a statement or a commitment, you want to show that you're there, then something like permanent public art makes sense. If you have a long development process, you have a marker that people can go to that says, yes, we've invested and we're coming back. But if you want to really encourage dialogue, curiosity, a static piece isn't necessarily going to do that for you as effectively. You might want to think about temporary works and program. You can change up the dialogue, stir things, and keep very current. If you really want instant energy and excitement, again, public art is a long process. You might want to think about pop-up. How do you do something really quickly and effectively? An important part in this step, then, is to really consider how you can leverage the cultural infrastructure that's already around you. How do you generate these wins, create the excitement and the visibility? And this is where engaging local artists, thinking about cross-sector partnerships is very important. It's about investing locally, and it's about understanding how you can bring new audiences from around the city to a particular place. You can move in a cultural institution that will willingly collaborate with the commerce that is there. We moved the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra into Wembley Park because I had a long relationship in that particular area of the city. You can really think about using graphic designers who can create large-scale environments really quickly. And also, you can think about small venues as being sculptures when they're dormant. How are these things on view 24/7? So step 4, this is very important. Understand your financial, human, and physical resources that you have or you're able to employ that's going to help you figure out the right cultural opportunity and partner. Again, if you only have 20,000, then you want to be very honest about it. You want to think about how you can effectively leverage that. And you want to approach people for which that price point makes sense. If you want to achieve something quite large, then you might need to approach somebody who's used to doing things of a scale and at that magnitude. What we also did as part of this guide is to basically apply the journalist questions. It's the easiest way to break down everything, to understand how you inventory what resources that you have. If you think through this, you'll realize very often you have a lot more on offer to the creative community than you think. Access to places, security guards, not having to go through permits, all of these things that you might take for granted are things that are exceptionally large obstacles to creative endeavors. And we talk about bringing in the artists and the community early in the process. Maybe not wait at the last stage in consultation. Maybe talk to your community at the early stage, maybe before you've created a brief, and find out what their interests are and find out how to reflect it. How do you think about partnering? This is really, really important. You leverage their joint promotion, their PR, their audiences. What's really important is that everybody is still looking for authenticity, and authenticity usually means what appeals locally will then be of interest to visitors. It was one of the things that shifted our big debate in Times Square constantly about, do we cater to tourists or do we cater to New Yorkers? Well, tourists want to know what New Yorkers do, so you don't have to choose. Step 5 is then, how do you turn this vision, objective, and resources into the clear brief? And how do you identify the right creative professionals to answer this? Again, like with any kind of area of expertise, it's really okay if you need cultural experts to come in and help you with culture. You might not bring your electrician in to do your plumbing, so you might want to think about bringing in your creatives to do the creative. And then what we underpinned always was this analysis of how you think about the social, the environmental, and the economic impact that you're looking at. So then the last step is really about how do you then identify what's the right match for the cultural opportunity and the artist that's working with the cultural professional to really complete this brief. And the other thing that we always had is that if you get to step 6, you can always go back to step 1 if you feel like you're not quite sure. But I also just want to leave you with, if you want to establish any kind of regular working practice, permanent or programmatic, there are a few things that I can give you here. One, it's really important to create structure to assist, but not to limit. How do you think about being authentic and distinctive, but through ambition? How do you set up the stages, the permissions, and the systems for collaboration? Make sure you address and are honest about your own blind spots. And then always surround yourself with those that can help. And please, commit. There are some ways to think about this. As far as spaces, you can think about the places that you have that have value, places that are undervalued. How do you elicit trust in shared risk-taking? How do you find the connection to the commercial? How do you find the connection to office tenants? How do you generate these places that will have great backdrops? And please, when you're designing your amphitheaters, I want you to think of how it will be used and to understand that sitting in the amphitheater, whatever you have as your vista, that is the scenic backdrop to anything else that's going to take place. So position it where you have the best scenic backdrop. In relationship to committing to financial resources, it's tough. It's changing everywhere. The US cultural institutions and academic institutions have new challenges, so we have to really, really think creatively. Tourist taxes are coming in. They're very, very small, and also it doesn't put the burden on the residents. It's a tiny bit that helps actually to keep it alive. How you think about trusts, like creative land trusts. What's happening now are foundations that are actually working in partnership with cities to develop new funding. How do you consider revenue generation as being possible? Think of tenancy service charges. How do you build this into what's expected to be in an office place? And how do you actually employ the arts versus marketing stunt activators? Do seek. There's been a lot of work that's been done. There was a conference, a symposium that was held in San Francisco just recently about creative land trusts and how to drive investment through this in the building. And also make sure to really think at looking at examples like the World Cities Cultural Fund has of over 60 cities around the world that have been doing things and sharing their successes. And then very importantly is invite the future into the conversation. It's really important to have young people involved in the consultation. There are many organizations working in this country too, as to how to gather the kind of consultation and engagement that feeds into city design. Approach the young artists. How are they working? What are they doing? It's very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. How do you find those new entrepreneurial creative industries? We have to fund arts education. We need to think about internships and apprenticeships and also partnerships and collaboration. To make the concept of open gate, we actually started by holding workshops with 18 to 25-year-olds. to understand how they work in their creative practice. How are they making money? What do they want and what do they do? And then we put them into a co-design workshop with Roger Stark Harbors and partners to actually inform the design. And then lastly, support with policy whenever possible. Think about a planning process that is going to place public benefit or offer commercial incentives. Might consider supplemental planning guidance that shares some of the ideas, and how you might get cultural advisors on the design teams. What you need to do is really understand what the cumulative impact of private development is. This is a diagram from a cultural planning framework for the City of London that really helps to map out what's happening and what's coming up. And then I would ask you as designers and architects, know when to stop designing. There's a Duchamp quote, "Ce sont les regardeurs qui font les tableaux," or in other words, it is the viewers who make the painting. So I say the best design is left unfinished. Leave room for the unexpected. Thank you. Right.
Sherry, amazing, really incredible work. A lot of the work that you show is really focused on creating a sense of spectacle. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you have any experience with interventions that are maybe quieter or have a different objective. I mean, your point about setting the objective is critical to the whole endeavor. So are there examples of interventions that maybe aren't as spectacular that you might reference?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, in some ways, you know, something like the bean isn't actually that spectacular when you approach it. Much of the interaction comes into play in actually the interface with it. But yeah, a lot of times it's also knowing which is the public art aspect or which is the art aspect and which is the design aspect. I would say actually, you know, one of the things that we looked at that, you know, is more subtle is actually how you set up the infrastructure for things to take place. And I think that's one of the things that was really important in this London Wall project. Oops. You know, where that isn't necessarily spectacular. The daily environment is one of calm and navigation, of like an intimacy of rooms, of different spaces in which you can be, but then it can transform into something that occasionally is spectacle. And so it is important, like you say, to understand what kind of designs might need that. But then, you know, there are pieces like, you know, really great memorials. It's one of the reasons why Maya Lin's memorial is so effective. It's simple, and it pulls the energy down, and it calms you, and it focuses you. So I think it's really important, like we say in the process of what are you trying to go for? And if you're in a place where you don't want spectacle and you want something that's maybe more contemplative or something like that, then you put that at the fore and you say that's what you want to happen. And then that can, I mean, there are so many incredible like land artist works, you know, and Andy Goldsworthy has these just subtle pieces of being able to mark in the land. You know, Max Newhouse's piece at Times Square, his sound piece, I'm amazed, you know, so many people don't even know it exists because it's a sound work that's just emanating underneath a grate in Times Square. And that is a very, very subtle intervention. He never would allow any signage or anything. He wanted people just to come upon it. So yes, there are times where you really do that. I would say it's still usually in contrast. When you're trying to calm it down or make it contemplative, it's just the opposite of a place that is confused, right? So it's always thinking about how you hold a little bit of that, what we would call dramatic tension in theater for it. Over here. I think, yeah.
This is so inspiring, thank you. I'm an artist in a room full of architects, and so much of architecture is artful. So what advice do you have for the room about how the two minds coming together can work really well and strategically and in a fun way?
Yeah, this comes up, and very often what I talk about is that public art is the punctuation. So very often, the underlying design is what needs to stay there. It's the sentence. But then that sentence can turn into very different types of sentences. So is it a question mark? Is it an ellipses? Is it a big exclamation point? So in that way, it's not necessarily that the art needs to be completely blended in and match, per se. Very often, it's something that you want that stands out a bit, makes that punctuation. In doing so, I would encourage all the architects, it doesn't take away from the architecture at all. It actually draws attention, even more so, to the beauty in the design of the architecture. So they're in a conversation, in a sense. They're not necessarily one trying to be dominant or recessive. And it's really understanding that. I think, that's why I guess I say sometimes to architects, like, know when to stop. Just stop with the design for a little bit. Leave a little room then for something or someone to be able to come in, to be in conversation and in dialogue with the architecture.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that there is a shift in culture, particularly in a broad way, and particularly for architects, from form follows function into maybe form follows feeling? And what do those feelings mean? And if we don't somehow invest or allow the opportunity for individual and group expression in culture, are we working against ourselves? Do you feel that that's a growing import for professionals?
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. I don't know whether it's necessarily a shift or whether there are different approaches and different pressures. I think the form follows function can still coexist with how does one experience a space, as well as how does it relate to the context of place. I don't envy you. The balance of it, and I listen, because I work with developers so much, I listen to how they speak, to architects sometimes, and it's exceptional, the kind of pressures that come. I would say, though, probably, the architecture will always go back to and refer to has considered feeling or experience and has considered context. And it's odd. I had a friend once who said to me, why is it you always feel like you can tell the B-level artist in a museum or something? How is it you can tell the difference between something that really stands the test of time and is referred to again and again? And there's something about so much work, so much consideration that then gets refined down to the final concept that somehow can always be felt. A really strong idea can be interrogated from many different directions and still stand up. Right, so therefore, if you think about it from the function it needs, the experience people have with it, and how it actually has a relationship to its environment, if you think about all of that, even if the client isn't as interested in all three, but if you do that, then it means that if anybody is asking you about it, you feel really confident in being able to answer it from any of those angles. And I think it depends where you are, what type of architecture you're doing, and where those sort of three criteria come into the hierarchy. So I don't, and not being an architect, I don't necessarily know if there's a trend necessarily in one direction or another. It really depends, where I'm working. It's one of the reasons why I like sort of floating around the world, is remembering there's not just one way of going about it. But, I feel like the methodology that we came up with, including culture for development, could be used for almost any kind of creative interaction, in a sense. Start with what is it that they actually want? How are they going to measure it by it? What are those big priorities? And then where is the freedom, within that to do that? I don't know if that answers, but okay. Thank you.